There's this is a hard hitting article that we were gonna do. I mean, we're gonna cover it anyway. But let me just read you part of this in here, because what people may not understand about tanks, it requires a lot of logistics.
Yep.
It also requires a no-fly zone, which this is gonna essentially give U.S. the ability to shoot down Russian aggression, because Russia would attack. If they see a train bringing all these tanks to go fight war, Russia would try to attack. That's the reason why they would require them to have a no-fly zone, which basically means it's U.S. now are fighting. And let me read it so I can kind of put it in a professional way. Let me read parts of it. I'm not going to read all of it. That's what I posted. Now, tanks are offensive, not offensive weapons. They are used to break through. Sorry, let me turn this on. They are used. Oh, that's somebody in our. Savvy. They are used to break through enemy entrenchments with the aim of capturing territory. Ukrainian officials have made clear the Western tanks are key to the achievement of their goal in the war, including the reconquest of the Crimea Peninsula held by Russia since 2014. Now, let me scroll down here. This is where it became to get eye-opening.
This is the obvious. This is the escalation that we saw coming here on RBN. It was only the morons on the NATO left that thought you send weapons and you bomb for peace. When has that ever been a thing? Oh, we just got remember that the Kyle Kalinske argument. Oh, we just send low weapons, that won't hurt.
A little bit.
Just send a little bit of weapons. Million. What does it hurt? Oh, we send a little bit of weapons that may lead to peace. Like how did that ever make sense? It was obvious. This was always part of the imperial plan to engage and escalate with Russia. Any excuse necessary. That's why real anti-imperialists, real anti-war voices was calling out the weapon spending on day one. They're not doing this shit where they're late. This is what so many people started doing now on the NATO level. Like, oh man, I having concerns now. That was their breaking point. We now got concerns over how much we're spending. That was Anna asked Matt Dust. Like, I understand protecting Ukrainians, but now I'm a little concerned over the spending. No, if you're really anti-war and anti-imperialist, we was calling out the spending from day one. Because it was obvious what the neocons' plan was. But go ahead, CJ.
So let me read a little more. Well, first, let me ask you, have you read this article?
I haven't read it yet.
Okay, because I like to bring articles you haven't read yet, because I like to get your raw reaction. So modern tanks this is where it blew me away that I personally didn't know this information. Modern tanks need vast logistic networks to arm and support them. Vast logistic networks. A single M1 Abrams tank consumes, Nick, 60 gallons of fuel per hour when deployed.
And that is the artillery that the NATO left signed off for, and they think they're climate activists. What is the carbon foothold for that? What's the carbon footprint for that? I mean,
we think the same, Nick. That was when I read that line yesterday. That was the very first thing I was like, do you see how now the military is the biggest polluter? This is insane, Nick. What if they have hundreds of tanks, Nick? What if they have 10 tanks? 60 gallons per hour? And let me continue. These tanks will require a massive train of logistic personnel to carry them over. Let me show you the picture of it right here. Now, this isn't the current one. This is from 2019, but this is just an example of what it's going to look like. So this is why they're going to have a no-fly zone. This is just rolling along on the train tracks, and Russia sees this like, why would they want to let you bring this in? But anyway, these tanks will require a massive train of logistic personnel, many of them likely to come from the armed forces of NATO countries. Not only the tanks, but their logistics and supply trains will become targets. Each Leopard 2 tank costs approximately 15 million, Nick. Let me pause there. 15 million. How many homes can be built for 15 million? How many people could be fed for 15 million from one tank, Nick? Do you want to chime in? Go ahead.
No, that's exactly, CJ. Does that sound like a smart use of our money in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of massive struggle amongst the working class. Of course, it's not. But that's 15 million to the military-industrial complex. They're saying the quiet part out loud, CJ. We played the clip of this, and you actually, if you think about it, Americans are concerned that we spend all this money, but they're actually being made here in America. They're actually going to American-made companies. They're saying this on corporate news channel, MSNBC, and Morning Joe. They say, don't worry about the cost. We are benefiting from it. We are making here at home and benefiting American workers and companies.
General Clark said that, I think. I heard General Clark say that specifically. Yeah. Maybe we covered the video.
Yeah, I think the same. I think that's the same video. But this is what it's really about. Like Julian Assange said, it's not about winning a war. It's about making money. They don't have no plan of really defeating Russia and China for geopolitical dominance. There's their last grasp at not only profits but maintain the offensive capital structure by any means necessary. But go ahead, CJ.
And that's true, by any means necessary. Let me continue. The protection of the now, this is the part where it kind of explains why this is an escalation. The protection of these weapon systems as they're traveling, you got to understand they have to protect them. Not to mention the troops that will service and supply them, along with the crew. The big logistics takes a large logistical network. Will become a vital military necessity for NATO. The U.S. and NATO have stake their credibility on the outcome of the war, which is ever more explicitly defined as the military defeat and dismemberment of Russia. The logic of the conflict requires, therefore, an ever greater escalation. This is what you were alluding to with the whole logic behind with Kyle Kalinske talking about 60 million in the beginning. No, it only can lead to a greater escalation if you keep funding it.
And people like Matt Jackson and other members of the NATO left, they said, well, another simple way for this war in Ukraine to end is for Russia to simply leave. And we just simply defeat Russia. And they expect they're expecting to trick the people who don't understand what that would entail. Like as if that's gonna happen in 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year. They're talking about long, drawn out war. That is when Russia said that's a red line. What do you guys think that mean? They're not going to lose that. They're going to invest everything into it. And we're going to invest everything into a country that does not even have a geopolitical significance for us, as lined out by other neocons as well. When they disagree on this, like when you see like Henry Kissinger come out against this, when you see the Tucker Carlson right come out against this, the argument is that why are we doing this when Ukraine doesn't even benefit us geopolitically? We should be focusing on China. That what Henry Kissinger saying. He killed us. Like, why are we doing this? We should be going after China. Look at the spread of socialism in the global South. And we waste our time on Ukraine.
Is it just because it's weapons manufacturers? Is that it? Is it just because they're trying to pay weapons manufacturers?
Yeah, and then you can speculate about loads of corruption when you link the Biden corruption with Ukraine, all the politicians and all their children that had positions on energy companies in Ukraine. So there's a long link of corruption that comes from Western leaders in the corrupt Ukrainian oligarchs in the region, that you can make the argument that also lead their investment and lead them to want to play around with the region more. But what a lot of the neocons argue is like, this is Russia's backyard. This buffer actually benefits us. They can have their backyard. We can have our area. But now there's a disagreement where the people in the West, they're like, we're not doing areas no more. We're not doing border. We want full spectrum dominance. We want the complete subjugation of the global working class and the global elites as well. And some people realize that's not realistic, but at the end of the day, they are making record profits for weapon defense contractors. The money machine rolling, and they're going to keep going this way as long as it does. And Julian Assange explained that as well. That's literally what it's all about. As long as they're making money, they don't care about how dumb these wars are. They're not going to feel the consequences of it. They can always escape it. They can always have media do propaganda for them so they don't face the social consequences of this.
Right.
But go ahead, CJ.
Absolutely. So here is how it explains why there has to be a no-fly zone and how this makes this the biggest escalation thus far. With its armored columns and supply lines threatened by Russian weapons and air power, either inside Ukraine or over the Polish border, The creation of a no-fly zone will again be mooted into the American press as a vital necessity to protect the commitment that has already been made. This would mean that in the name of defending its military assets, the tanks and the people supporting it, U.S. and NATO pilots and SAM operators would be engaged in shooting down Russian warplanes, kicking off a direct shooting war between the U.S. and NATO. Let me read this last part, and I'll read. We can close this short section. This is the prospects of which the American and European population is being signed up for, Nick. Without their knowledge by governments that promise to avoid World War III and nuclear Armageddon. And I have to read this other part. In an expression of reckless and provocative character of NATO's action, the New York Times wrote, over the last few weeks, one barrier after another has fallen. Another quote, the United States and its allies take on more risk to defend Ukraine. And this is where it gets crazy in The Economist. In a lead editorial advocating sending main battle tanks to Ukraine, The Economist wrote, quote, another worry is that if Russia is pushed too far or too fast, its president, Vladimir Putin, could escalate and, in the worst case, even trigger a nuclear war. These are not baseless fears. But then The Economist goes and argues for sending tanks despite the danger. Quote, now ended here with this quote, if Mr. Putin concludes that his nuclear threat won him this victory, it would set a terrible precedent. Yielding to Putin's nuclear threat today sets up more perilous standoff standoff tomorrow. Just unreal. Unreal.
That's the neocon. They're doing journalism that's what the takeaway is supposed to be. Yo, we shouldn't be doing this, right? You read it like, yo, this is crazy. We shouldn't be doing this. So they add that last part just in case you're asking questions. They like, wait, don't get any fucking crazy lefty thoughts here. We're gonna do this. It's worth it. That doesn't even make sense. Yielding to Mr. Putin's nuclear threats today set up more perilous standoffs tomorrow. No, the perilous standoffs will happen right now. What do you mean? They saying more peace will lead to more dangerous war later. Dude, that's the unhinged ideology of the West.
Let me read this part here. The imperialist war planners assume that they can intensify their engagement in the war without a Russian response. But if Washington isn't afraid of the consequences of nuclear war, why do its war planners seem to believe that the Kremlin will be? That's a great point to make and close on, Nick. Just amazing what's happening.
Yeah, since
go ahead. If you have something to add or something.
Yeah. Since we're on Ukraine, I wanted to show you guys this as well, because this is some more evidence that the West knew exactly what they was doing. I'm gonna show this here. Let me share my screen here.
The Aaron tweet. Oh,
yeah, and this is from WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks helped us get this information. Accurate Viewpoint guest post. Diplomatic cables show Russia saw NATO expansion as a red line. And this is the information that Matt Duss, we just showed. He is complicit, and the NATO left is complicit with trying to rewrite history. Remember how he said there's no history, there's no conflict. Ukraine and Russia have no history, no culture together, even though right next to each other used to be countries. He literally stand in front of the camera and lies to people every day and say that Russia, Ukraine, no connection here. Putin just went crazy one day and flipped. Like when Ilhan, when these people are called out by this, when people are called out by the fact that U.S. and the West escalated this war, they say, like Ilhan responded to Alex and people like, I'm so happy I get a chance to call out Russia propaganda for you guys bringing up this here. But let's continue. Commentators have rushed to declare the long criticized policy of NATO expansion as irrelevant to the war's outbreak. And that's why they keep using the term unprovoked. Unprovoked this, unprovoked that. You even see progressive people start saying unprovoked Putin war. They follow the memos for some reason. right? But yeah, I'm gonna go this far. Yeah, a review of the public record and many dozen of diplomatic cables made publicly available via WikiLeaks show that U.S. officials were aware or were directly told over a span of years that expanding NATO was viewed by Russian officials well beyond Putin as a major threat and provocation. That expanding it to Ukraine was a particularly bright red line for Moscow and would inflame, empower hawkish nationalist parts in Russia political spectrum, which exactly happened. What we say on the show, CJ, despite what the Western media say, they was, oh my God, Putin being criticized. They wouldn't explain the criticism. The criticism is like, Putin, why aren't you going harder at this war? Like those are the people that Putin, you're not taking this war seriously enough. You're wasting time and resources on this. We need to go out and crush them. I'm gonna continue here. In a particular prophetic set of warnings, U.S. officials were told that pushing for Ukrainian membership in NATO would not only increase the chance of Russia meddling in the country, but risk destabilizing the divided nation. That is what Matt Duss and these Ukraine simps also raise. They will say stuff to me like this. They will say stuff to Aramate. They will say stuff to Glenn. They will say stuff to people telling the truth about this war. People like Wyatt. They will say, "Oh, you think you're saying that all Ukrainians are Nazis?" And I always say, "No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that you guys are arming the Nazi faction of Ukraine. There's a large amount of Ukrainians. These are the people who voted for Zelensky on the peace platform because a lot of Ukrainians that just want to go back to peace. Then you have about 1/3 of the country that speak Russian, like ethnic Russian as well, that has been attacked and been criminalized and marginalized by the Ukrainian government. Then you have the Romanis, you have Black people, you have Muslims who was attacked and made second-class citizens in this country. So we are the only ones who understand that Ukraine is not this monolithic, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus country. It's the Ukraine simps that think that. It's the Ukraine simps that think the entire country hates Russian people. That is what Matt Dutt tried his best to convince you. No, this is a divided country. It's always been divided to the point where the BBC did a documentary that showed 8 years ago. There's a large segment of people in Eastern Ukraine that said they literally want to be part of Russia. The West used to report on this stuff. But then they explain this one explain all of this was told to U.S. officials in both public and private, and not just senior Russian officials going all the way up to the presidency, but by NATO allies. So this is like not only just Russian sympathizers, but NATO people, various analysts and experts, liberal Russian voices critical of Putin, even sometimes U.S. diplomats themselves. And this last part, Rika, this is important to note. This history is particularly relevant as U.S. officials now test the red line China has drawn. As I explained, I told you guys, they love probing red lines. And then they convince white people that, oh my God, look at this unhinged Asian country. Look at the unhinged Russian people. Look at the unhinged Muslims. They are finally fed up with us messing in their country. They fought for it. That's really what it is. The people, CJ, the people in this country that think China is the aggressor. The ones surrounded by U.S. military military bases. They think they're the aggressor.
It's unserious.
But anyway, let me
go ahead. No, go ahead. It was a different thing.
The U.S. officials now test the red line drawn in China around Taiwan's independence, risking military escalation that will first and foremost be aimed at the island state. The U.S. diplomatic record regarding NATO expansion suggests the perils of ignoring or outright crossing another military power red lines and the wisdom of a more restrained foreign policy. It's a restrained, what is that shit? What's that? Remember Hillary Clinton? She literally said that if she took over, that she would have a more offensive, muscular foreign policy compared to Barack Obama.
Wow.
Bro, imagine that. And people, I'm still glad she lost. We dodged a fucking bullet. Imagine seeing the drone strike king in Barack Obama. Seeing that guy, and you're like, oh, that guy's a fucking pussy. We need some more muscle. And we see it with Joe Biden, apparently. We see it with Joe Biden.
It would have been basically more Libya's under Hillary Clinton. It would have been more Libya's because she was the one that was pressing go in and go in and take out Gaddafi's.
Yeah, this is a great tweet by Glenn. IB openly stated It's been openly stated in Washington for 2 decades, ever since Clinton and Bush wanted to expand NATO eastward to Ukraine, that doing so would provoke a civil war and even a war with Russia. And the U.S. did that. So now you're seeing a lot more these people having to acknowledge the reality. Maybe a lot of Western people are, well, actually they are in corporate media. They're still lying to themselves, but the rest of the world is not. The rest of the people who are not tied to corporate journalism, they can see what's going on here. I also want to read this tweet from Aaron and I can use this to wrap this segment up, because this is another tweet put out, and this is what I hope Taiwanese people are smart enough to see through, and I think they are. That's why they reject the separatist party in their last election. But you had many NATO officials and EU officials speaking bluntly, admitting that they're using Ukrainians, and it's really sick, because I watch a lot of these corporate media coverage of the Ukraine war, and you always see they use terms like the Ukrainian resolve. The Ukrainians, they got such resolve fighting this war. Like, how you know? How do you know? There are people there that want peace. They voted for peace. But it's oh no, they resolve. They want to fight Russia to the end, don't they? Yeah, they want to fight Russia to the end. They got such resolve. Take their blood, our bullets. That's what they said. Our blood, their blood, our bullets. But anyway, this Aaron Mate, he reported from the Wall Street Journal. Edward Stringer, ex-head of the operations in the UK defense staff, becomes the latest Western official to admit that NATO is sacrificing Ukraine to bleed Russia. He said, by continuing to drip feed just enough for Ukraine not to lose, what the West is doing is just prolonging the war. And that's why I don't understand why people be like, oh, yeah, I think I was stopped at 60 million, 60 billion. So they're like, we're doing just enough, not going all the way in, but just enough to keep Ukraine in it so we can maximize profit and the geopolitical consequences to weaken Russia. That's what many of them said. They want to sacrifice as many Ukrainians as possible to weaken Russia. It's not about caring about the Ukrainian people. The people who care about the Ukrainian people are the people that call on NATO to stop expanding. I would call for the abolisement of NATO, to end Western intervention in the state of Ukraine. That is what happened. That is what you want if you care about the Ukrainian people, not the Western strategy.